Hello friends, I'm Lydia, the Halfling Seamstress, and for this project I made a Victorian-inspired waistcoat. I say inspired because somewhere along the journey of the 5 mock-ups I made, I went from total reconstruction of the Keystone waistcoat to inspiration using a hodgepodge of patterns. Let me explain. No, there's too much. Let me sum up. Mock-up 1. I wanted to go with a recreation of the waistcoat in the Keystone Guide to Jacket and Dress Cutting, much like Bernadette Banner and her Lady Sherlock. I found a pattern on Etsy that had already drafted it out, so I didn't have to math. Made the mock-up, and it was unwearably small. Mock-up 2. Having made some alterations, added what I thought was enough room, made another one, and it was still way too small. Having never tailored a thing before, I had no idea how to proceed and threw the mock-up into my UFO pile for months. Mock-up 3. I bought the black snail waistcoat pattern thinking I could alter it into what I wanted. It was close, but not quite, and the ways it wasn't quite right meant I still didn't know how to make it work. Mock-up 4. Bernadette released a video on tips for achieving historical styles with modern clothes, and I went, hey, I have a vest in my closet that actually fits me. If I traced this out, what would I need to change about the pattern to make it look Victorian? So that is ultimately what I did. I carefully traced around this vest, then looked at historical patterns, adjusted some of the lines and darts, and it fit great. Mock-up 5 was more of a precaution on my part. I tried making some alterations to the fit that I thought would be better, but I actually liked mock-up number 4 better, so I scrapped number 5 and got to sewing for real. I started with the back and lining fabrics first. I used a nice crisp silk for the backing and a sleek Bemberg for the lining. For the front of the waistcoat, I went with this really nice cranberry twill. Last Christmas, I decided I wanted a waistcoat skirt combo for Christmas of 2022, and that's just how long it's taken me to make this. I was also inspired while watching season 15 of Murdoch Mysteries when Detective Watts sported a burgundy waistcoat. I don't always get a visceral, I need that costume in my life reaction, but I felt very strongly about that waistcoat. So here we are. I also cut out an interlining for the front pieces out of horsehair canvas. As the name suggests, this is a fabric that is woven in one direction with usually cotton, and in the other direction with horsehair. This means you get one direction that bends and moves with the body, and one direction that is stiffer and helps hold the shape of a tailored garment better. The darts on the canvas interlining get cut out instead of just folded down, so as to reduce bulk. I also marked in the lapel line where I wanted the collar to turn over, so I knew how far to work the fabric. Before I started assembly, I thread marked all my twill pieces, as the chalk I used tended to rub away with handling, and I wanted to make sure the seam lines stayed precise. Instead of pinning the darts in place, I decided to try using a ladder stitch to help ensure a correct fit, and I am rather a fan of this technique now. It allows you to instantly see that the dart lines match up perfectly, which always kind of gave me grief in the past. Once the ladder stitch was tightened, I did pin down the darts as well, just to doubly make sure they stayed put. Then I stitched them in place, backstitching by hand with a matching silk thread. And I did the same for the darts on the back pieces as well. I basted the canvas to the front pieces to prevent any shifting during sewing. Then I carefully brought the dart edges together and sewed them down with a herringbone stitch. This was finicky as it was my first time attempting the herringbone stitch, but it ended up being kind of fun. A common technique in tailoring is pad stitching, where by making little basting stitches along a deliberate path and shaping the garment in your hand as you sew, you can pre-shape a garment before you add any additional structure or even assemble all the pieces. This is very helpful for things like jacket or waistcoat lapels, and by pad stitching you can have the lapel set to fold over in the direction you want, and you're not relying on firm ironing to get that fold. This was yet another new technique for me. I've used pad stitching to baste fabrics together, but never in the tailoring method. I was kind of nervous. What if I do it wrong and screw it up? But I actually found the process quite enjoyable, and I love the result it gave. Since tailoring is scary, I started with easy pieces, the ties for the back. After sewing the ties together, I trimmed the seam allowance. I didn't have any buckles and I was a little short on time, so I decided to grab a pair of D-rings from my crafting stash and use them for the buckles. And I have to say, they work pretty good. Then it was time to start sewing things together. I began with the lining and fashion fabric of the back pieces. Before assembling further, I gave the front pieces a bit of a press, remembering to press the darts on a bit of a curve so they would stay in the shape that they now really wanted to stay in, and pressing the lapel into the shape it would sit in after assembly. Then I quickly stitched up the neck seam. Then I joined the back pieces to the front pieces. For a project that seems daunting, it has remarkably few pattern pieces and went together quite smoothly. Except for joining the back piece to the back of the neck/collar area, that required some careful snipping and finagling. And the fact that I got this far and then realized I had just sewn the back and front together and had completely forgotten to pin the ties in place. I tried it on quickly, thinking maybe I could get away with not including them, but once I had the vest on, I realized that the ties really do improve the silhouette. So I carefully unpicked the little section where they were supposed to go and stitched them in place by hand. Then I repeated the sewing process with the lining fabric. It is a very slippery fabric that is prone to warping and gathering, so I had to hold it in place most of the time I was stitching with the machine. I stitched the back straight edge by machine, but there were a couple of spots that were so tricky to maneuver that I decided it was easier to just stitch them down by hand. Then I added the facing, which gives more stability and structure to the collar and makes the entire front of the waistcoat appear seamless. After it was stitched and pressed down, I did a quick running stitch along the edge of the seam to help hold everything in place. The modern method of lining is called bag lining, where you pin the two fabrics right sides together, sew almost all the way around, and then flip it right side out. For this project, I used the 19th century style of lining, where you match up the two fabrics wrong sides facing, pin the seam allowances under and in, and stitch them down together with a felling stitch. More time consuming, yes, but very enjoyable. There comes a time in any crafting project where you realize you made a mistake that is just a special kind of stupid, that somehow, when attaching this seam here, which goes along there, somehow I managed to put an entire twist into that, so that trying to pin up this armhole does this. It's not supposed to do that. So now I have to unpick all this, re-sew it up, and get on with the vest. I did not want to have to do that. The facing edges get turned under and stitched to the lining fabric, which holds both fabrics in place. Then I whip stitched everything together using cream silk thread for the backing and a plummy burgundy silk thread for the facing area. experimented with the Victorian idea of adding stays to the inside of the vest to help give the tailored shape. So I stitched down a bit of ribbon and added some synthetic boning, aka industrial zip ties. However, when both pairs of stays were added, I wasn't actually a fan of the silhouette, so I ended up taking out the smaller pair and just keeping the longer pair, the one that sits closest to the facing. Then I marked out buttonholes and stitched them down. After I finished the buttonholes, I marked out where the buttons were to sit. I got these lovely buttons off Etsy and quickly stitched them down. After that, it was just a final fitting where I decided to take in a dart at the underarm seam and it was ready to wear. This was quite a process and easily the most technically challenging project I've made so far. There were a lot of techniques involved that I was doing for the very first time, and there were definitely moments where I felt like I had no clue what I was doing. This was a mishmash of patterns. I had to keep referring back to old books and videos for guidance, and I felt like there was a lot of flailing involved. There's an odd feeling as a creator where you can look at something you've made and point out every single little flaw, every little detail that you would have done differently. And it's so easy to get lost in those thoughts that you end up not enjoying the finished creation. I struggle with that a lot, and this project was no different. I can tell you all the places where I think I could improve, and where I will improve next time. But when an outsider looks at a project, all I see is something incredible. Everyone who has seen me wear this vest out and about so far has had nothing but glowing feedback. That's gorgeous. That's incredible. I could never make something that detailed. You look terrific. And it helped put my imposter syndrome to rest. At least for a little while anyway. So if other people can look at a project and only see the beauty and the details and the good stuff, I need to give myself permission to do the same. To stop being so critical and just enjoy that I have a rockin' Victorian-inspired waistcoat. You know what? It turned out pretty swell. And I figured, since this waistcoat was inspired by Murdoch Mysteries, there was only one suitable place to take it out for its very first spin. This is Murdoch Mysteries, the exhibit, and is currently on display at The Museum in Kitchener, Ontario until February 2023. It is a fantastic collection of set recreations, props, and costumes from the show, some from all the way back in the very first season. Chatting with some of the folks responsible for putting the exhibit on, it was clearly a labor of love for everyone involved, and as a longtime fan of the show, it was absolutely delightful to get to step into the world of Murdoch for a weekend. If you are a fan of the show and live in or around Southern Ontario, I highly recommend you check it out.